My son sold my wedding ring, the one I had kept safe for decades as the last living memory of my marriage, just so he could buy himself a shiny new car. He thought I was too old, too broken to fight back. He believed I would just let it go, but what happened next is something he will regret for the rest of his life. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you are watching from. That ring was not jewelry to me. It was 48 years of marriage to my Helen, my best friend, and the love of my life. It had been on my finger when we said our vows, when we brought Marcus home from the hospital, and when we built a life from nothing. Even during the hardest years at the steel mill, when I came home covered in soot and bone-tired, I would see the glint of that band and remember why I worked so hard. Through fights, forgiveness, anniversaries, and holidays, it was always there. When Helen died 3 years ago, that ring became sacred. At her funeral, with trembling hands, I slid it off my finger for the first time since our wedding day, because the director told me to remove it before the burial. From then on, it lived wrapped in Helen's silk handkerchief inside the safe in my bedroom. Every night, I opened the safe, held it, and whispered to her about my day. That gold band connected me to her more than anything else on this earth. Marcus, my only son, had been living with me ever since Helen passed. He was 24, and instead of being my comfort, he became a burden. Lazy, entitled, sleeping until noon, gaming all night, eating my food, using my money while I covered his bills, car insurance, and even his phone plan. He never helped with chores, never once said thank you, and never showed me the respect a father deserves. I told myself he was grieving in his own way, that maybe with time he would grow up, get a job, and find his footing. But the truth was, he was not grieving. He was taking advantage. Every time I asked him to work, he accused me of not understanding how hard life is for young people. I had worked since I was 15. I knew struggle. What I saw in my son was not struggle. It was laziness and entitlement. That was what made the betrayal so deep. It was not just the theft of a ring. It was my son telling me he saw no value in the one thing I cherished most. He did not see love, sacrifice, or memory. He saw an old piece of gold he could sell for quick money. And in that moment, Marcus crossed a line that would change both our lives forever. It was a Tuesday morning in October when my world collapsed. I had just returned from my weekly visit to Helen's grave, something I never missed. Every Tuesday, I brought fresh flowers and sat with her for an hour, talking to her as if she were still sitting beside me. That time gave me peace. I left the cemetery lighter, comforted by the idea that she still heard me. But that morning, the peace lasted only until I stepped into my house. The first thing I noticed was that my bedroom door was slightly open. I always kept it closed. My stomach tightened. I pushed it open and froze. My dresser drawers had been pulled out, papers scattered across my bed, and the safe in the corner sat wide open. Its contents spilled across the floor like someone had dug for treasure. The safe had been my sanctuary. It held the documents of a lifetime, Helen's letters, photographs from our wedding day, and most importantly, the silk handkerchief she once used to polish my wedding ring every Sunday. I rushed toward it, my hands trembling. The papers were still there. The insurance policies were untouched. Helen's jewelry box had not been moved, but the handkerchief was empty. The ring was gone. The panic I felt in that moment was worse than the day Helen died. At least then I had prepared myself for the inevitable. This was different. This was a violation so personal, it felt as if someone had ripped my heart straight out of my chest. I fell to my knees and picked up the empty fabric. The silk felt lighter, useless, stripped of the one object that gave it purpose. 48 years of marriage, reduced to nothing more than an empty cloth. The realization hit me like a hammer. Whoever had taken the ring had not just stolen gold. They had desecrated a temple of memories. They had destroyed the one physical connection I still had to Helen. As I sat on the bed surrounded by the chaos, a rage began to grow inside me. It was not the kind of anger that flares and burns out. This was cold, steady, and terrifying. I had faced bullies in the mill, had fought through poverty, had survived loss. But this betrayal was different. This came from inside my own home. The walls of my bedroom felt smaller as I thought about who could have done this. Strangers had not broken into my house. The locks were intact. The windows were untouched. Whoever had done this knew where the safe was, knew what it contained, and knew how much it meant to me. As I sat in the wreckage of my private world, the truth began to take shape. The betrayal was not random. It was close. It was personal. And in my gut, I already knew who had done it. The sound that broke the silence was impossible to ignore. A roaring engine shook the street, loud and obnoxious, followed by thumping music that rattled the windows. I rushed to the front window and saw a sight that made my blood run cold. A brand new red Mustang convertible gleamed in the driveway. The paint sparkled in the sunlight, chrome accents shining like a trophy. Behind the wheel sat Marcus, my son, grinning ear to ear. He revved the engine again and again, honking the horn, drawing every neighbor's attention. Mrs. Henderson stepped out onto her porch. Mr. Johnson, from across the street, folded his arms and frowned. Marcus waved at them proudly, like he had just won a prize. The car was beautiful. It smelled of fresh leather and polish, the kind of car that belonged to someone who worked hard and earned success. But Marcus had no job, no savings, and no credit. My heart pounded as suspicion twisted in my chest. I stormed outside, my jaw tight and my fists clenched. Marcus saw me coming and smiled even wider. "Well, what do you think, Dad?" he called over the blasting music. He expected praise. I stopped by the driver's side and looked at the sticker still stuck in the back window. $25,000. My knees almost gave way. $25,000 for a car. My unemployed son, who had been living off my money, now sat behind the wheel of a machine worth more than my first house. "Marcus," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, "where did you get the money for this car?" He leaned back, full of swagger, and shrugged. "Relax, old man. I found a buyer for that dusty ring sitting in your safe. Got $8,000 for it." The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. For a moment I could not breathe. My throat closed. My son, the boy I had raised, had just casually admitted to stealing the one thing that meant more to me than my life. But Marcus was not done. He smirked as if he had outsmarted me. "You weren't wearing it anyway. Mom's been gone for years. Time to move on." I felt the air leave my lungs. The cruelty of those words cut deeper than the theft itself. It was not only that he had stolen the ring, it was that he saw no meaning in it at all. To him, it was just an old piece of gold. To me, it was Helen. It was our love. It was 48 years of my life. Marcus revved the engine again and peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching, leaving me standing there with neighbors watching in silence. My son thought he had won. He thought I was too old and too broken to do anything about it. But as I watched that car disappear down the street, one thought hardened inside me. Marcus had no idea what he had unleashed. I stood in the driveway long after Marcus sped away, the echo of the engine still rumbling in my ears. The neighbors slipped back into their homes, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. My son had stolen my heart and sold it for a toy. He had not only robbed me of a ring, but mocked the love it represented. I walked back into the house in a daze. The safe was still ajar, papers scattered across the floor, the silk handkerchief lying empty. I picked it up again, clutching it in my hands until the fabric crumpled into a ball. My chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe. For nearly 5 decades, that ring had never left my side. It had been there through struggles, victories, and losses. And now, my own son had reduced it to a pile of cash in someone else's pocket. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind replaying every word Marcus had said. "Mom's been gone for years. Time to move on." The cruelty of that line hit harder than any fist could have. It was as if he had spit on her memory, as if all the love and sacrifice Helen and I had shared were meaningless to him. He did not understand what that ring represented, or worse, he did not care. The grief I felt was raw, sharp, and unbearable. It was the same hollow ache I had felt the day Helen passed, but now it was mixed with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I had raised Marcus. I had provided for him, sacrificed for him, loved him unconditionally. And this was how he repaid me. By taking the one thing I treasured most and selling it for a fleeting taste of luxury. As I sat there, something shifted inside me. The sadness turned into something harder. I could feel the steel of my old life at the mill return. I had been broken once before when I buried Helen, but I had learned how to keep moving one day at a time. I had endured loss. Now I would endure betrayal, but I would not endure it quietly. I whispered aloud, almost like a vow, "That ungrateful boy just sold my heart for a toy. He has no idea what he's unleashed." I rose to my feet, my legs steady now. The fog of shock cleared, replaced by resolve. I knew Marcus thought I would let this slide, that I would sigh, maybe scold him, and then continue to support him like I always had. But he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had taken from me something that could never be replaced. I looked around the ruined room one more time, then closed the safe door. From that moment, I made a decision. I would not yell. I would not beg. I would not plead for him to understand. I would teach him. Marcus would learn, in ways he never expected, that every action has consequences. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. The grief had not left me, but it had been joined by something else: determination. I had spent my life as a steel mill foreman, solving problems with method and precision. When machines broke, you did not panic. You found the fault, documented the evidence, and fixed it. That was exactly how I was going to handle Marcus. My first stop was Henderson's Jewelry downtown. Helen and I had bought our wedding rings there nearly half a century ago, and we had returned every anniversary to have them cleaned. The owner's son, Jim, now ran the shop. He recognized me as soon as I walked in, and when he saw my expression, he set down the tray he was holding. "What happened, Frank?" he asked quietly. I told him. About the theft, about Marcus's confession, about the Mustang gleaming in my driveway. My voice shook when I spoke of the ring, but I kept my tone steady as I asked him to check if Marcus had brought it through his doors. Jim sighed, then began making calls. 20 minutes later, he looked at me with a mixture of anger and pity. "Your son didn't bring it here, but word travels fast. He sold it for $8,000. Frank, I need to tell you something. That ring was worth at least 15,000, maybe more, given its craftsmanship and history. I clenched the counter until my knuckles turned white. My son had not only stolen from me, but had thrown away half the value just to make a quick deal. And it gets worse, Jim continued. That $8,000 didn't buy the car outright. The dealer said he put the rest on credit. Used your address. I felt my stomach twist. 8,000 down. 17,000 owed. He had tied my home, my name, into his reckless purchase. On the walk home, I ran the numbers in my head like I used to tally production sheets. Marcus had traded away the most sacred thing I owned for debt. He had shackled my identity to his greed. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I began to list every form of support I had given him since Helen died. Free housing, free food, free utilities, insurance, phone, gas, clothes. It came to $30,000 a year, $90,000 over 3 years. And now he had the audacity to add fraud on top of it all. I looked at the final sum, circled it twice, and underlined it, 90,000. That was what I had poured into a boy who would not lift a finger to help himself. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the number until it blurred. Then I whispered, I raised a thief and a liar. No more. This time he learns. The investigation had begun, and I was just getting warmed up. I spent the next 2 days combing through every bill, every receipt, and every account statement I could find. It was not just about the stolen ring anymore. I wanted the full picture of what Marcus had taken from me over the years. If I was going to hold him accountable, I needed numbers that spoke louder than emotion. Rent in my neighborhood was at least $1,200 a month. That meant $14,400 a year in free housing. Utilities averaged $200 a month. Another $2,400. Food for him, at least $400 a month, added up to nearly $5,000 more. His car insurance was $1,800 a year. His phone plan, $600. Miscellaneous spending, gas, clothes, nights, out easily another $2,000. When I totaled it all, it came to more than $30,000 a year. For 3 years, that meant $90,000 I had poured into him since Helen passed. 90,000, not counting the stolen ring or the fraudulent loan tied to my name. And what had Marcus done with that support? He had squandered it. His computer history told the truth. I checked it one evening when he was gone, and what I found made me sick. No job applications, no interview emails, no research into training programs, just hours of video games, endless scrolling through social media, and group chats full of jokes about how easy it was to live off his old man. I read messages he had sent to friends where he bragged about never having to work, about how gullible I was, about how he could get anything out of me with a sad story. It's like winning the lottery, he had written. The guy is too lonely to say no. My chest burned with shame and anger. He did not see me as a father. He saw me as a wallet, a fool, a weak man too broken by grief to fight back. I sat back from the desk, staring at the evidence. The pattern was clear. Marcus had not just stumbled into bad habits. He had built a life out of manipulation. He had taken advantage of me, day after day, dollar after dollar, until he felt entitled to everything I owned. The theft of the ring was not a sudden mistake. It was the natural end of a long pattern. He had been bleeding me dry for years, and now he had decided my memories were his to sell as well. I picked up the folder of evidence I had compiled and placed it carefully into the safe, now secured with a new lock. This was no longer a father's suspicion. It was a case, neat and documented, with dates, numbers, and proof. I whispered to myself as I shut the door. It ends now. No more handouts, no more lies. He will face the cost of every choice he has made. I knew Marcus expected confrontation. He thought I would yell, curse, maybe even throw him out in a fit of rage. That was how he saw me, a bitter, grieving old man, too soft to follow through. If I showed anger, he would only dig in, paint himself as the victim, and twist the situation until I doubted myself. I would not give him that satisfaction. So I did the opposite. I smiled. When he came home that evening, swaggering in with his Mustang keys dangling from his hand, I greeted him with a calm voice. "Marcus," I said, "I owe you an apology." "Oh." His eyebrows shot up, surprise flickering across his face. He leaned against the doorframe, smirking like he had already won. "I was too wrapped up in my grief over your mother," I continued. "That ring was sitting in a safe gathering dust. You were right to do something useful with it. I'm proud of you for taking initiative." For a moment he just stared at me. Then he grinned wide and smug. "I knew you'd get it eventually, Dad. The ring wasn't doing you any good. Now it's helping me build a future." I forced myself to nod, even though bile rose in my throat. "And that car, it's beautiful. Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Johnson were both impressed. You made a smart financial move." He puffed up with pride, strutting through the living room like a conquering hero. "Exactly. Everyone's jealous. I turned junk into something worth having. That's business sense." I kept my face neutral, but inside I was seething. His arrogance was a gift, though. He talked too much when he thought he was admired. Over the next few days, I played the role of supportive father, asking about the car's features, offering to help keep it clean. He bragged endlessly, revealing details I needed: where he bought it, what kind of financing he got, even leaving paperwork lying around that I quietly photographed. Each boast was another nail in his coffin. One night, as we sat on the porch, Marcus leaned back in his chair, grinning at the Mustang parked in the driveway. Most people would have let that ring rot in a box forever. But I saw potential. I turned nothing into something. That's what winners do. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. To him, Helen's ring was nothing. To him, 48 years of love was scrap metal. Yet I kept my mask in place and answered, "You're sharper than people give you credit for." He smirked. "That's what I've been saying." What Marcus did not know was that every word, every arrogant laugh, every careless admission was ammunition. I was documenting everything. I was building a case as solid as steel. Let him think he had won. Let him bask in his stolen glory. The Mustang gleamed in the sunlight, but soon enough that car would cost him everything. The mask was working. Marcus grew cockier each day, convinced I had accepted his betrayal. He strutted around the house like he owned it, bragging about his car and his bright future. But arrogance makes men careless, and soon he left the proof I needed scattered like breadcrumbs. It started with a phone call. A woman from Premier Auto Financing introduced herself, polite but confused. "Mr. Thompson, we're missing your signed documents for the Mustang loan. Could you come by to complete the file?" I froze. "What do you mean, my documents?" "Well, sir, you're listed as co-signer. The application has your income, employment, history, and signature. We just need the final verification." The room tilted. My suspicions were confirmed. Marcus had not only stolen my ring, he had stolen my name. I told her I never signed a thing. She faxed over the paperwork, and when I saw it, my stomach turned. It had my social security number, my financial details, even a forged signature that almost looked like mine. The application claimed Marcus was my business partner in a consulting firm. It was a complete fabrication. created with my information. I felt sick. He hadn't just stolen a ring. He had planned this, studied my documents, practiced my signature, forged an entire identity. When Marcus came home that evening, I kept the mask in place. He tossed his keys on the counter and bragged about showing off the car to friends. "Everyone says I look like a boss in it." I smiled faintly, but inside I burned. He was parading around in stolen glory, using my name to prop himself up. That night, I made copies of everything. Loan papers, fake signatures, notes from my calls. I stored them in a folder marked evidence and locked it in my safe. Marcus thought I was blind. In truth, I was documenting every lie. The truth was clear. My son was no longer just entitled. He was a criminal. He had forged, stolen, and defrauded his own father. I whispered to myself as I looked at the forged papers. He didn't just take my ring. He stole my name, and that's something he will regret. The next phase required precision. Marcus had been living like a parasite for 3 years, draining me of nearly $100,000. That ended now. The first call was to the car insurance company. I canceled his policy immediately. "If he's driving, he drives uninsured," I told the agent. "I won't be responsible." Next was the phone company. I cut his line from my plan. His number went dark that very night. Then the utilities. I had the accounts rewritten in my name only and arranged for locks to be changed. The locksmith, an old man with rough hands, replaced every lock in the house while Marcus was gone. When he finished, he handed me a new set of keys. "Tough situation?" he asked. I nodded. "Something like that." That evening, I packed Marcus's belongings into boxes. His clothes, his gaming setup, everything he had treated like treasures, while giving me nothing in return. I stacked the boxes neatly on the lawn. By the time the Mustang pulled up, the porch looked like a moving day. Marcus got out, confusion etched on his face. "Dad, what's all this?" I stood in the doorway. My voice was steady, cold. "Adults who can afford luxury cars don't need Daddy's help. Your room, your meals, your bills, all done. You want independence? You've got it." He stared at me, stunned. "You can't just kick me out." I opened the door a little wider. "You stole from me. You forged my name. You sold my heart for a car. Get used to consequences, Marcus. This is only the beginning." His face twisted with anger, but he said nothing. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. The morning after I put Marcus's boxes on the lawn, I walked into Millfield Police Department carrying a folder thick with evidence. I had photographs of the broken safe, the empty handkerchief where Helen's ring once lay, the forged loan papers, and even recordings of Marcus bragging about his business sense. I was not just a grieving father anymore, I was a complainant. Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, listened quietly as I laid out the case. Her brow furrowed deeper with every piece of evidence. When I showed her the forged documents, she let out a low whistle. "Mr. Thompson, this is serious," she said. "Theft over $5,000 is already a felony. Add in identity fraud, forgery, and the fact that you're a senior. Your son could be looking at years, maybe decades, if convicted." I swallowed hard. It felt like acid in my throat to hear the word convicted linked to my son. But I nodded. He chose this path. If I let it slide, he'll do it again to me or someone else. She asked me one final question before taking the report. "Are you certain you want to move forward? Once we start, There's no undoing it. I stared at the folder in her hands, then thought of Helen's face. The way she had slipped that ring on my finger nearly 50 years ago. My chest tightened, but my voice was firm. Yes, press charges. That afternoon, I called Premier Auto Financing and explained that the loan had been obtained fraudulently. The supervisor I spoke with sounded weary, but unsurprised. Family fraud cases? We see more of them than you'd think, he said. I faxed over copies of the police report and my sworn statement. He promised they would cooperate fully with the investigation. By nightfall, the wheels of justice were turning. Marcus had no idea what was coming. He thought the worst was that his things were on the lawn and his father was angry. He didn't know he had just stepped into the jaws of the law itself. The first real consequence came swiftly. 2 days after I filed the fraud report, I heard the rumble of a tow truck outside. I stepped to the window just as a burly repo man in coveralls backed into my driveway. Painted on the side of the truck in bold letters were the words, "Professional Recovery Services." The man didn't even glance toward the house. He worked with practiced efficiency, attaching chains and hydraulic lifts to Marcus's pride and joy. The Mustang's alarm went off, blaring across the neighborhood, but the repo man didn't flinch. Within 10 minutes, the gleaming red car that Marcus had stolen my heart to buy was lifted onto the truck. Neighbors poured out of their houses, drawn by the noise. Mrs. Henderson clutched her bathrobe and stared in disbelief. Mr. Johnson crossed his arms, a satisfied look on his face. They had all watched Marcus parade that car up and down the street, revving the engine to show off. Now they were watching his humiliation. I stood behind the curtain, silent, my pulse steady. I felt no joy, but I felt justice. The car was gone, the illusion shattered. Later that night, Marcus stormed back, slamming the door so hard it rattled the hinges. "They took my car!" he shouted, his face red with fury. "You've got to help me get it back!" I met his rage with calm. "That car was never yours. You bought it with stolen money and forged papers. Actions have consequences." His voice cracked. "Dad, please, I can't lose it. Everyone's seen me in it. I'll be a joke." I looked at him squarely. "You already are, and the world is just starting to see it." He sank onto the couch, head in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. For the first time, I saw not arrogance, but panic. The house of cards was collapsing. What he didn't know was that the repossession was only the beginning. The police had his case in motion, and soon it wouldn't just be his car ripped away. It would be his freedom. Marcus thought losing the Mustang was rock bottom. He had no idea the ground beneath him was about to give way. 3 nights later, the knock came at his friend Jake's apartment, where Marcus had been crashing. According to the report I later received, officers moved in quickly. They read him his rights as Jake stood frozen in the doorway. Marcus kept shouting, "This is a mistake! My dad wouldn't do this to me!" But it was no mistake. Detective Chen herself was there to ensure it went smoothly. She later told me Marcus looked stunned, like a child caught stealing candy rather than a man facing felony charges. The list was long. Theft of property over $5,000, identity fraud, forgery of legal documents. Each one carried years in prison. Together, they painted a picture of a man who had betrayed not just his father, but the very foundation of trust that holds families together. That night, my phone rang. I didn't need to look at the caller ID to know who it was. Marcus's voice trembled on the other end of the jail phone line. "Dad, please, you have to help me. They're saying all this stuff, but you know I didn't mean it like that. It's just a misunderstanding. Get me a lawyer. Post bail. Please. My throat tightened, but my resolve held. Marcus, you made adult choices. Now you face adult consequences. I won't bail you out. I won't hire you a lawyer. You did this to yourself. His voice broke into sobs. If I get convicted, I could go to prison for years. My life will be ruined. I swallowed the ache in my chest and answered, You ruined your life when you sold your mother's ring. Prison is just where the law catches up. The line went silent. When the call ended, I sat in my chair, staring into the dark. My son was behind bars, and though it tore at me, I knew it was the only path left. Sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is step back and let justice teach the lesson love could not. News of Marcus's arrest spread faster than wildfire in our small town. By morning, it was plastered all over the local Facebook groups. The headline practically wrote itself. Man steals late mother's wedding ring, sells it for sports car. Mrs. Henderson posted first, recounting how she had seen the Mustang repossessed, and then watched Marcus being led away in handcuffs. Her post was shared dozens of times before nightfall. The comments piled in. Some were sympathetic to me, others harsh toward Marcus. Who steals from their own father? One neighbor wrote. Another said, That ring was sacred. That boy deserves every year they give him. It didn't stop at Facebook. Screenshots of the story spread to Twitter and Instagram. By week's end, regional crime blogs had picked it up. Marcus's mugshot sat beside captions like, The ultimate family betrayal. The social fallout was brutal. Friends who once rode in his Mustang now ignored him. Employers who might have overlooked a rough resume wanted nothing to do with him. Even distant cousins posted their outrage, saying Helen's memory had been desecrated. For me, it was a strange mix of vindication and grief. Part of me was glad the truth was out, that people understood what he had done. Another part of me mourned that my son's name had become a byword for betrayal. I overheard neighbors whisper when I walked into the grocery store. Some patted my shoulder in sympathy, others shook their heads in disgust. The shame followed Marcus everywhere, even though he sat behind bars. But that was the point. He had paraded his stolen glory before the community. Now the community was the mirror, forcing him to see what he truly was. A thief, a liar, a son who sold his father's heart for a car that didn't even last a month. After the arrest, Marcus was released on bail while awaiting trial. He swaggered less, but I could see he still thought he might wriggle free. That illusion crumbled the moment he tried to find work. Everywhere he applied, the same wall greeted him. Employers ran background checks, saw the pending felony charges, and shut the door. His reputation preceded him thanks to the internet. Type his name, and up popped mugshots, headlines, and Facebook threads about the boy who stole his mother's ring. He tried the local auto parts store first. The manager, Tom Rodriguez, remembered him from when Helen used to bring Marcus along to buy supplies. At first, Tom was polite, but when Marcus walked in for an interview, Tom looked uneasy. "You're Frank's boy, right? The one they're talking about online?" Marcus fumbled excuses, claiming the story was exaggerated. Tom cut him off. "If you'd steal from your own father, why would I trust you with my inventory?" He ended the interview on the spot. The rejections kept piling up. Restaurants, retail stores, landscaping crews, construction companies, even businesses desperate for workers turned him away. Nobody wanted to risk hiring the thief everyone in town was talking about. One employer told him bluntly, "Hiring you would tank our reputation. Customers won't trust us if they see your name on the payroll." Marcus grew bitter, lashing out at me as though it were my fault. "You ruined me, Dad. If you'd just kept quiet, none of this would have blown up." I met his fury with silence. He still couldn't see that he had ruined himself long before the police ever got involved. The only work he eventually found was through a warehouse that hired felons and desperate men. Minimum wage, grueling shifts, no benefits. It barely covered food and bus fare, let alone legal fees or restitution. For the first time, Marcus was forced to taste the reality of adult life stripped of privilege. And reality bit hard. News doesn't stay quiet in families. Soon, the calls started coming from relatives who thought they had a say in how I should handle my son. My older brother Ray phoned first. His voice carried that same tone he'd used when we were boys, trying to calm a fight. "Frank, don't you think involving the police was too much? He's your son. Helen wouldn't want this." The words stung. But Ray didn't know the whole story. So I told him. I described the broken safe, the empty handkerchief, the forged papers with my signature. I told him about Marcus calling Helen's ring junk. By the time I finished, Ray's voice had changed. "Jesus, Frank, I didn't realize. That's not just a mistake, that's betrayal." Others called too. Cousin Beth, who had always defended Marcus, rang me in tears after hearing the details. "I thought you were being harsh," she admitted. "But that ring was everything you and Helen built." He crossed a line. Eventually, Ray organized a family meeting at his house. Relatives gathered Beth and her husband, my sister Margaret, even my nephew David, who had once idolized Marcus. They wanted to find a path forward. I sat in Ray's living room and laid it all out again. The theft, the fraud, the arrogance. I showed them a photo of Helen smiling on our 40th anniversary, her ring gleaming on her hand. That wasn't just gold. That was our life. He sold it for a toy. The room grew heavy. Margaret wept. David, once ready to defend Marcus, shook his head. "If he did this to you, Uncle Frank, he'd do it to anyone." By the end, the consensus was clear. Even those who had wanted me to forgive admitted Marcus had gone too far. "That ring was sacred," Ray said firmly, "and he desecrated it. You did the right thing," the family had spoken. Marcus wasn't just my problem anymore. He was the cautionary tale none of them would forget. When Marcus realized the weight of what he was facing, his bravado collapsed. The confident smirk and cocky strut he had carried through life evaporated. In its place came desperation. Calls, letters, and tearful pleas replaced arrogance, but they all rang hollow to me. The first attempt came through the jailhouse phone. His voice cracked the moment I answered. "Dad, please, you have to help me. I can make this right. I'll pay you back every cent. Just tell the prosecutor you don't want to press charges." I let him speak, though every word scraped at the walls I'd built inside. He rattled off promises, as if they were bargaining chips. He said he'd sell his things. He said he'd finally get a job, any job. He swore he'd never disrespect me again. But I'd heard those promises before. Years of empty words delivered whenever he needed something. True to his word, he started pawning off his belongings. His expensive sneakers, gaming consoles, the designer clothes he flaunted while living under my roof. He even sold the headset he used to spend nights shouting into while playing games with friends. All of it amounted to barely $2,000, a fraction of the $15,000 Helen's ring was worth. He sent word through his lawyer that I could have the money as proof of his remorse. But when I looked at those bills stacked neatly in an envelope, I felt nothing but bitter sadness. How could money replace the sacred bond he had severed? How could a few $1,000s make up for the theft of nearly 50 years of love and memory wrapped in a simple gold band? He still didn't understand. The calls kept coming. Dad, what if I come home and work for you? I'll mow the lawn, clean the house, cook dinner. I'll do anything. He was bargaining like a child, trying to escape punishment with chores. But this wasn't about labor. This wasn't about debt. This was about betrayal that pierced deeper than any chore could fix. When I told him so, his desperation turned to anger. So that's it? You're just going to let them destroy me? You're really going to sit there and let your son rot in prison? I stayed calm, my voice measured. No, Marcus, I'm not destroying you. You destroyed yourself the moment you opened that safe, the moment you forged my name, the moment you decided your greed was more important than the love your mother and I built. This isn't about me letting anything happen to you. This is about you facing the consequences of your own choices. For the first time, I heard silence on the line. Not the impatient silence of someone waiting to jump back into an argument, but the hollow silence of a man finally beginning to realize that there would be no shortcuts, no manipulations, no bargaining his way out this time. Dad, his voice broke into a whisper. I don't know if I can survive this. My heart clenched, because no matter how far he had fallen, he was still my son. But I steeled myself and answered with the truth. Then you'd better learn, Marcus, because survival is all you've left yourself with. The line went dead. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, my chest heavy. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I wept not out of grief for her, but for the son I had lost long before this trial ever began. The courthouse was fuller than I expected. Word had spread far beyond our small neighborhood, and people who barely knew us came to watch. The story of the son who sold his dead mother's wedding ring for a sports car had become almost legend in town, whispered in grocery store aisles and posted on Facebook groups. Now, the community wanted to see the ending. I sat in the front row, my hands folded tightly, as Marcus shuffled in, wearing a borrowed suit that hung loosely from his thinner frame. He looked nothing like the cocky boy who had revved his Mustang in the driveway. He looked like a man beaten down by the weight of his own actions, but I couldn't tell if it was true remorse or simply fear of what was to come. The proceedings began with the prosecutor laying out the charges. Theft of property valued at more than $5,000, identity theft, and fraud. Each charge carried years of prison time if the judge decided to throw the book at him. The prosecutor did not sugarcoat it. Your Honor, this was not a mistake. This was not desperation. This was a calculated betrayal against his own father, an elderly widower. The defendant not only broke into a safe and stole a family heirloom worth $15,000, but he also forged legal documents and used his father's financial information to obtain a fraudulent car loan. These are not childish errors. These are felonies that show intent, preparation, and a staggering lack of conscience. I watched Marcus's head sink lower with every word. His lawyer, a weary-looking public defender, argued back, My client has no prior record, Your Honor. He is young, inexperienced, and has shown signs of remorse. He has attempted to make partial restitution. Prison will not help him become a productive member of society. Probation and structured restitution will. Then it was Marcus's turn to speak. He stood stiffly, his voice trembling. Your Honor, I made terrible choices. I stole from my father, and I forged his name. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I thought I was entitled to more than I had. I was wrong. I hurt the only person who ever truly cared about me. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. I just ask for a chance to make things right. The courtroom was silent, as Judge Sullivan, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, leaned forward. Her words cut deeper than any sentence ever could. Mr. Thompson, you did not simply steal property. You desecrated something sacred. A wedding ring is not a piece of jewelry. It is a symbol of love, memory, and family. You stole not only gold, but history. You betrayed the most sacred trust that exists between parent and child. And you sold that trust for a car that lasted you less than a month? Marcus winced as if each sentence struck him physically. I sat frozen, every word echoing the truth I had lived since the day Helen slipped that ring onto my finger. Finally, the gavel came down. I hereby sentence you to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution in the amount of $25,000 to be paid to your father within 5 years. A murmur rippled through the room. He had avoided prison, but the sentence was heavy. For a boy who had never worked an honest day in his life, years of labor, garnished wages, and constant oversight would feel like chains. As the bailiff led him away, Marcus turned his head, his eyes briefly meeting mine. There was no arrogance left, only the haunted look of a man beginning to understand what consequences meant. Outside the courthouse, a reporter shoved a microphone in my face. "Mr. Thompson, do you feel justice has been served?" I paused, my chest tightening. "Justice? Yes," I said finally. "But peace? Peace is something else." The verdict should have felt like closure. Marcus had stood in court, admitted his guilt, and been handed a sentence that would follow him for years. Restitution payments, probation, community service, it was everything I thought I wanted. Yet when the gavel came down, I felt no triumph, only a heavy silence that echoed long after we left the courtroom. The first restitution check arrived 2 weeks later. It was for a modest sum, maybe $200. The amount pulled straight from his paycheck at the warehouse where he had finally managed to find work. The envelope came with a short note, clearly written under the instruction of his probation officer. "Payment enclosed. Working double shifts. Hope you're doing well." I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into a drawer. The money didn't matter. I didn't want his paycheck. I wanted the ring, the one Helen had polished every Sunday morning, the one that had sat heavy on my finger for 48 years, the one Marcus had traded for leather seats and a growling engine. No check, no apology, no court order could bring that back. Month after month the envelopes came. Each one landed in my mailbox like clockwork, a reminder of both justice and loss. At first, I stacked them neatly in a folder, recording every payment. Later, I stopped opening them right away. Sometimes they would sit on the table for days, unopened, as if delaying the ritual might somehow dull the sting. But the sting always came. Neighbors congratulated me. "You showed him," Mr. Johnson said one evening as we crossed paths at the grocery store. "He'll never forget this. Mrs. Henderson from next door told me she admired my strength, that she wished more parents had the courage to hold their children accountable." Their words were kind, but they didn't fill the empty space where Helen's ring used to sit in my palm at night. I had justice, yes. The system had worked, but justice felt like a cold gray shadow compared to the warmth of memory. When I had held that ring, I felt Helen's presence, her laughter echoing in the walls of our home, her hand resting lightly in mine. Without it, all I had was silence. One evening, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, I pulled the folder from the drawer. I spread the checks across the table, 20 neat slips of paper, the combined total inching toward a few $1,000s. I tried to feel satisfied, tried to convince myself that this was victory. But all I saw were lifeless rectangles of paper, meaningless next to what had been lost. I thought of Marcus, working long hours in that warehouse, his back aching, his youth squandered on labor he once sneered at. Maybe he was learning discipline, maybe he was growing, but whatever growth he found came too late to heal what he had broken. That night, I whispered into the quiet, as I often did. "Helen, I did it. I made him pay. But I still feel empty." The truth pressed down on me like iron. Justice had been served, but healing had not. The court could demand money, but it could not restore memory. It could not rebuild trust. It could not fill the space left behind by betrayal. It was, in every sense, a hollow victory. 6 months passed after the sentencing. The checks still arrived, but they had become routine, like bills or junk mail. Each one was a reminder that Marcus was out there somewhere, working long hours, paying for what he had done. I didn't see him, didn't speak to him, and in some ways, it was easier that way. Then, one Saturday morning, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Marcus stood on the porch, clutching a small box in both hands. He looked older, leaner, his hair unkempt, his eyes tired. Gone was the arrogance that had once poured off him in waves. What stood before me was a man worn thin by consequence. "Dad," he said quietly, his voice no longer carried the edge of defiance, "I've been saving. I wanted to give you this." He held out the box. Inside was a simple gold band, newly purchased, polished until it gleamed. Not Helen's ring. Nothing could ever be Helen's ring again, but something meant to take its place. "I know it's not the same," he said, his words trembling, "but I wanted to give you back what I took, even if it's just a symbol. I'm sorry, Dad. I'll be sorry for the rest of my life." I stared at the ring for a long time. The gesture was sincere, I could see that. He had probably scraped together every spare dollar from his meager paychecks to buy it. But it wasn't the same. It never could be. "Marcus," I said, my voice low, "you can replace a ring, but you can't replace 48 years of memories. You can't replace the nights your mother polished it before bed. You can't replace the weight of it on my finger as I held her hand for the last time. That's gone forever." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the child Helen and I had raised, the son who once looked up at me with trust instead of betrayal. But those moments were ghosts now. I closed the box gently and handed it back to him. "Keep it," I said. "Wear it. Let it remind you of what you destroyed. I don't need a replacement. What I need is peace." Marcus nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. "I understand," he whispered. He tucked the box into his coat and turned to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know I'm trying." When the door closed behind him, I stood in the silence, my chest heavy. There had been no yelling, no threats, no arrogance, just sorrow. Perhaps he truly was changing. Perhaps the lesson had sunk in, but the damage was done. The bond between us was fractured beyond repair. That evening, I took Helen's photo from the mantel and held it in my hands. "We raised him the best we could," I murmured, "but he chose his own path, and he can't undo what he's done." The house was quiet again. I had won, yes. I had taught him a lesson. But the victory left me lonelier than ever. A full year passed after Marcus's sentencing. By then, life had settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and unbearably strange. The checks kept coming every month, each one a reminder of the debt he owed, not just in dollars, but in broken trust. They stacked neatly in a folder on my desk, yet I rarely opened them anymore. Money couldn't heal wounds that ran this deep. Marcus had found steady work. Through whispers in the family, I learned he was holding down 2 jobs, living in a small apartment above a laundromat, barely making ends meet. He was paying his debts, serving his probation, and keeping his head down. On paper, it looked like progress. But in my heart, the gap between us remained as wide as ever. Then, on what would have been Helen's and my 52nd anniversary, I received an envelope with no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Marcus's, though shakier, more deliberate. Inside was a single-page letter. "Dad," it began, "I know today is important to you, to both of us. It should have been a day to celebrate the love you and Mom shared, but instead it's a reminder of what I destroyed when I stole your wedding ring. I've thought about it every single day. I finally understand what I took from you. I'm sorry will never be enough." His words were careful, stripped of excuses. He wrote about the nights he lay awake, haunted by the image of me finding that empty silk handkerchief where the ring used to rest. He wrote about the arrogance that blinded him, how he believed he was untouchable, and how losing everything, his freedom, his reputation, his family, was the only thing that forced him to open his eyes. The letter ended simply, "I don't ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I only ask that one day, when you think of me, it's not just as the son who betrayed you, but as the man who finally learned what betrayal costs." I folded the letter and placed it inside Helen's photo album, tucked behind a picture of her on our wedding day, wearing the very ring he had stolen. It felt right. The letter was not the ring, not even close, but it was a piece of truth, a piece of growth, something I could keep without bitterness. Still, I knew the truth. The relationship we once had was gone. We spoke only through those checks and rare second-hand updates from family. He had learned to survive on his own, and I had learned to live without him. Sometimes I wondered if that was Helen's lesson all along, that love cannot exist without accountability, that forgiveness is not the same as trust, that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone fall, even when it means they may never climb back to you. On quiet nights, I sat in the living room with Helen's picture on the table beside me, whispering to her like I always did. "Justice was served, Helen. But justice doesn't heal everything, does it? Some wounds never truly close. I had won, yes. Marcus had paid. But in the end, what remained was a fractured bond, a life rebuilt on silence and distance. I had taught him a lesson he would never forget, but the cost was steep, perhaps too steep, because sometimes the greatest punishments are not delivered by a judge or a gavel. Sometimes they are carried in the quiet emptiness left behind by love that cannot be restored. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.